Hi, it's Patricia Walsh and Mark Jones here to talk to you about transference and boundaries, specifically to astrologers working professionally with clients. I want to introduce myself. I'm Patricia Walsh, and I am speaking to this subject with my 20 plus years of experience as both an evolutionary astrologer and a regression therapist, which is a little out of the mainstream of counseling astrology, but deals very deeply with these issues of transference and projections and things that people bring to sessions and how we can hand that back to somebody to give them empowerment and agency. So, Mark, tell us a little bit about you.
So I'm a psychosynthesis therapist and an astrologer. And my second book, The Soul Speaks, was about the therapeutic potential of astrology and discussed, for example, projection and transference from various different viewpoints and how it might be held within, the dynamics of astrology in both single session readings and ongoing work. And I followed this up with the Counseling Skills for Astrologers course on my website, plutoschool.com. And that explored in detail the issues that might come up and even, shall we say, the kind of specific type of transference that could come up with an astrologer as a kind of celestial messenger, Patricia. I mean, what therapist do you ever see who's kind of going, I am going to translate for you now the message of the stars to you, So it sets things, doesn't it, on a certain tone. And I don't want to leap ahead too much here, but it's important not to demonize transference. If there was no transference, why would someone be talking to you if they didn't have some sense that Patricia Walsh's experience in deep memory process could help them? If they didn't have that, why would they have sought you out or be making that phone call or that several $100 booking or journeying to that conference to see you? So it's really important not to demonize transference or projection. They are completely natural things. If you didn't have some of it, if there wasn't some positive transference, then the encounter probably wouldn't be taking place. But clearly transference is also a loaded term. And as you said sensitively in your introduction, the discerning practitioner attempts over time to give any agency that got transferred to them within the projective dynamic back to the individual.
Sure.
But the pace of that would depend on the vision of the work. So in long-term psychotherapy, a therapeutic mentoring figure or a therapist might hold that transferential state for longer, knowing that it was coming back, but that in holding it for longer, more of its root system, if you like, the complex series of interlocking tree roots behind it would have chance to come out. That's clearly completely different in, say, like single session astrological consultancy or short-term coaching follow-up.
But transference can be just as strong, if not stronger, in those. We're going to talk a minute about the different kinds of roles that we feel come with the profession of astrology. But before we go there, maybe it's useful from your perspective as a psychosynthesis therapist, what might you share with counseling astrologers on just what is the definition of transference for you?
I mean, effectively, transference is the recreation of earlier significant relationships, usually parental, but not always, in the current situation. It's like bringing the projected significance of your interpersonal life to sessions. Now, it doesn't always have to be parental. Let's take a kind of slightly cheesy example, right? You come for a session with someone you're super excited to work with, and then they use a phrase describing something offhand that your uncle always used to use. And your uncle was always very severe and critical when discussing the kinds of things you were discussing with this figure. And suddenly you get a tremor and you go into a past feeling, is this person judging or mocking me? Even though they just accidentally used a casual phrase that reminded you of an historic event in which you felt this strong discharge of emotion. So transference is effectively bringing forward into the present through relational terms, past strong emotional discharge, emotionally cathected experience. It usually has its origin in parent-child material at its deepest level. It's usually the recreation of the need of the child to bond or have that loving rapport or receive an element of their being reflected back through the loving gaze of the parent, and then them feeling a certain loss of that perspective. And then the powerful need wells up within. Where can I get that validation?
Right.
Yeah.
Now, in energetic terms, just to take it out of psychotherapeutic language, for people, for everybody listening, in energetic terms, to me, transference is, it can be, as you're talking about, a strong affect. The origin, of course, could be, yesterday, childhood, or at least in the work that I do, coming from deeper within the soul, right? Deeper within the soul's memory, then pointing to the point that it's extremely unconscious, right? So further than that, I always feel that the idea of transference is always an underpinning, is that it's unconscious on both sides. And part of the process of working with transference is to be aware of oneself during the process of sitting with somebody. So an energetic picture I often give regression students is your complexes kind of sit out here somewhere in your energy fields, right? Like think of it like somebody who hates cats. And there's 5 people in the room, and the cat will go to the person who hates the cats and get all in their energy. It's like they sense something. So we're all walking around with these little bits of unresolved complexes sitting, you could even spatially picture it like 5-10 feet away in your energy field. And as you're walking around, people step into your energy field and start playing out your complexes. Right. So, this is the projective function. But at the same time, it also is going to bring up these kinds of things that somebody's stepping into your complex and you stepping into theirs is going to have this kind of subconscious intercourse, right? That needs to be brought to the consciousness, as you said, for therapeutic reasons.
So that would be the generalized significance of projection to me, and the way, as you point out, and I think the energetic or field dynamic view of projection and transference is much more nuanced than the somewhat atomistic view. There's some visions of transference that are a bit like that old Atari game Pong. I am the one stick here, boom, 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 boom. The little ball feeling goes to you, you bounce it back, But actually, there's a field dynamic in which we're both participating. We're both presences. We're both souls or beings within a complex, multidimensional field, which includes emotion, psychology, etc. But just to clarify a distinction there, in classic psychotherapeutic literature, certainly in the psychoanalytic tradition, there is this vision that the therapist can receive or understand the transference, or at least the hope of the individual they're working with, without just their transference being triggered. And of course, now you could say this is a naive therapeutic ideal, but certainly it's a significant one. And then the idea of countertransference is the times when the therapist is caught off guard by the power of the transferential material and then can't help but be led into unconsciously acting it out. And that's a super powerful idea that I discuss in the Soul Speaks and in the counseling skills program. Like completely unwittingly, it can come up on you. I remember working with a young woman who'd had a very bullying stepfather after her alcoholic father had left the family and indeed passed away. And this bullying stepfather used to make her terrified of coming to see me, even though she liked and trusted me. And I used to do all sorts of games to break through that. Once famously playing with a green frog, a laptop cleaner, the whole session, just throwing it back and forth and shouting silly things at each other to break up the authority that kept putting her into this persecutory, I will be bullied place. And then one day, just as she was making this totally profound breakthrough, she went utterly silent, like someone had just come and robbed her voice, right? And there was this incredibly powerful charged field in the space. And I was like, inside, I was like, oh no, don't stop now. We were so close. And a part of me almost wanted to rise up and say, no, go for it, go for it. And I realized I didn't do it because, of course, that would have been a tragic error, because she would have experienced that as bullying and persecutory, just like this man. And I actually realized in the moment it was a counter-transferential discharge. It was actually the side of her that was so used to being received
If
like
she
that,
was, her
recreating
energy
that.
was casting you in that role. That's exactly what I was talking about.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, from a field dynamic point of view, when you realize that it's not tennis, I project onto you like serving, and you know, bound back the service to me, and then I hit a forehand. When it's not this kind of atomistic dynamic and the energetic space you talk about, I realized, reflecting on that incident later, that when certain traumas are constellated, in her case, the frightened little girl, they also constellate like a shadow image of the persecutor or the bully. And they're created as a dyad. And then the way I realized this was a relatively trivial conversation. Soon after that incident, when I felt the power of her hidden energy, she told me about an incident when she was having coffee with her friends, and she shared the hurt little girl to them. And she felt quite upset and despondent because they shut down and didn't respond to her. But I realized why. Because alongside the little girl is the horrible, bullying older stepfather who never accepted her. And when she shares the wounded little girl, the hidden energetic imprint of this other figure comes out into the space and freaks her friends in the coffee shop out. So the energetic dimension that you mentioned is fascinating. It actually includes, for me, relational dyads, or even more than that, or, you know, group experiences. And of course, the karmic dimension that you mentioned, you know, is in a sense the whole world of developmental psychology, Patricia, from that vantage point, an attempt to understand how the karmic memory body has shaped your early life or come into your early life.
Well, preconditioning is, I always say, you know, in simple terms, it's the childhood you forgot you had, right? So these you know, karmic conditions that we
That's a great phrase.
Right? It's the childhood you forgot you had, because it's going to inform you. So, for example, you know, one of the ways that we are able to deal with it in regression therapy, which is so facile and so easy, is that there's, you know, maybe a couple energetic stances that one can take. First, the session is not about me, right? So there's that shamanic, drawing from that shamanic understanding of being the hollow bone. Now, there can be inflation involved with that and denial involved with that. So it's a delicate energetic poise to navigate. So but first comes awareness, self-awareness. So first, the session is not about me. You know, I had a client come who is, when people come into, as you know, any therapeutic situation, they're already coming in quite frequently triggered with some aspect, right? That's the point of them coming. So, you know, I had somebody
exactly. That's the forgiving response to that. Yeah. The whole thing wouldn't be happening unless that trigger or that wound had led them to search.
Exactly. So it's going to come. Of it, yeah. And one of the first things that I feel in working with people is to have a witness kind of consciousness for myself, where I could, because I tend to be very empathic, right? So if somebody's sitting in my session room and they're talking to me and I'm feeling my stomach clenching, you know, I might say, so rather than, you know, say, I'm just going to say my energetic poise is that I'm being a mirror in a hollow bone. So I'm going to assume that that doesn't belong to me first.
Yes.
Right. And ask the person, so it feels to me, are you feeling anxious, or are you feeling fear, or are you feeling anger? Because lots of times people will be sitting there talking to me and there's this brewing anger underneath, right? Or I feel myself getting angry with that person, right? These are really basics of transference, is, you know, being aware of the energetic interplay that's going on and then being able to bring it up and address it. Yes?
I mean, I think that's the great gift that your work in deep memory process and my work as a therapist, separate to the astrology, could offer to the astrology community, because that's not people's initial response. It takes a certain training and awareness to learn that in that space, you know, like you meet someone 10 minutes into the session, you're incredibly tired and you feel really depleted and dragged down, but you weren't tired before. You weren't feeling that way before the session started. But people can be paranoid. Oh, I should have taken more care of myself. I shouldn't be, I'm losing my clarity. I'm not serving this person. They don't realize they're being told by the deeper energy of the person, where the person is really coming from, in a much more complex and all-encompassing way than just the words. So I couldn't agree more, but it takes a specialized kind of awareness, doesn't it? Astrologers who are rarely coached in this kind of thing are not used to reading those complex feelings. You know, that agitation comes up in their gut and they start thinking, oh, I didn't prepare that chart enough last night. You know, I haven't read the Pluto Mercury square that this person has right, and they're not taking me seriously or whatever. They start going into a defensive response to it. But clearly practitioners like our good selves, who've had very, many hours of effectively clinical work with people non-astrologically, or we might know their chart, but we're going into a territory that isn't a conventional astrology reading. We're used to reading that space. In fact, for some people, that might be the most articulate they ever get. The way they made you feel, the way their unconscious communicated their deepest feeling to you. But we must underline, for early and even experienced astrologers, it is not usually a specialized part of astrological training to recognize this pattern that you're talking about, to recognize that some of the material coming up in your field may not be yours. And maybe that's one key takeaway from this issue of transference and boundaries that therapy, people who have deep therapeutic experience could offer, which is to at least include the possibility that it might be the other person.
Exactly. Well, and to handle that with the delicacy, with compassion and delicacy, and as material for the reading, right? Or material for the session.
Exactly. Possibly the most accurate, possibly the most profound, heartfelt, communication that person will ever offer you. And frequently, the real challenging part is that people who really feel shut down and silenced by some of their past experience, that's really the more profound level of articulation. Like that young woman I was describing, she felt so shut down by the bullying stepfather, she could never say what was going on. But if you sat with her, it was almost like she was letting off some kind of energetic firework. It was so powerful. I mean, it's a massively complex subject, isn't it, as we acknowledged before we spoke, and we want astrologers to feel they can have some kind of relationship to it. And I think you just mentioned the key first principle. It's a relational space, it's a relational field, and the way that you're thinking and feeling may be influenced by powerful thoughts and feelings and psychic undercurrents from the person you're sat with. And you could, over time, learn to read those undercurrents almost as powerfully as you read signatures in the chart.
Absolutely. Well, and because you and I work in evolutionary astrology, which is an astrology that seeks to kind of X-ray a person, and this isn't in a in an invasive sense. It's more in the sense of really understanding the core dynamics of that person's psyche. We can go into some very sensitive and as you know, right, very sensitive and vulnerable material. So I feel in the style of astrology you and I practice, as well as our therapeutic backgrounds, that it's essential to have this kind of understanding.
I agree.
But let's speak to somebody who might not be working with such deep psychological astrology. I want to share this image that I put together on understanding some of the kinds of roles. So let's step back for a moment and realize astrology is has a several thousand-year tradition behind it, right? And as we know, astrology itself evolved out of something that was prophetic. And you said it before, it's written in the stars.
Yes.
Is still a prevalent archetype.
Yes.
And I think that in the general public and people that come to astrologers, they come with these kinds of subconscious roles. They're looking at an astrologer as a fortune teller or a prophet or a diviner or a magician, or even in the counseling sense, as a sage, a counselor, an entertainer, a performer. And so for myself, when I see this in the astrology world, what I feel again goes back to the point that I made before. Be aware of your own complexes that may play into these kinds of projections and subconscious transferences. So if you're into being the person who's the helper, the fixer, the savior, and somebody's coming in with that, archetypal lens on you, the first thing I would say to an astrologer is if I were to give you a tip, I think I would say something like, how about having the awareness of what drives you in your practice? There's nothing, we all want to help, we want to fix, we have complexes. Let's recognize that and be compassionate with ourselves. But we can also counter them by actually starting a session with somebody by saying, I'm not a magician, right? I'm not a magician. So if you're feeling that this is a kind of archetype that you play into, a subconscious archetype, head it off at the pass and say, I'm not a magician. I'm not, it isn't just written in the stars. There isn't just one way to read a chart. I'm speaking through my lens.
Well, right? I think that's just so important. And you could include then, if this is useful to you, brilliant. Or if you're struggling with something, have a think about it. Or if it really doesn't work for you, don't take it away. Give the agency back, even in the way you inform people in the moment. But that magician point you make, Patricia, is just brilliant. I mean, I've called it the magician complex. And you can see all of these possible roles we could play as astrologers, and you could find the shadow in all of them.
Yes.
What happens to the fortune teller when they can't find the fortune, or they can't see the good things, or how do they convey bad news, or the prophetess when, classically throughout classical culture, they weren't believed, or the Cassandra complex, or and all of this sense that, intuition is flowing through you like that hollow bone, but you have those days where the intuition isn't coming, or you have those clients, yes, who could argue, who aren't energetically ready for that intuition to come through, in which case you need a rigorous method, you need a relational technique, you need to approach them, you need to work out what the best thing can be. But the magician fantasy is really challenging in astrology, I think, because many astrologers by personality type are attracted to weird books and esoteric libraries and ritual and symbols and what have you. And there is this temptation then, like, Mickey Mouse in The Sorcerer's Apprentice, in Fantasia, to go in and start being out of your depth and start wanting to say things,
well, and manipulation.
Yes. Well, and even
misuse of power.
Maybe this person's there with this young person who's really projecting all this kind of love and goodwill onto them, and they just but they can sense that young person's distress. Astrologers, I think, all the time are led into saying more than they actually see, out of this desire to kind of give something, or show their own power as the magician, but as the counselor type too, to offer something to save, some remedial measure, or some sandwich theory of these difficult things are going on, but I'm going to put this good thing in the middle, and all these techniques. For me, people don't respond well to these tactics. They want a real encounter, that even though they want some skillfully, understood astrology, on a deeper level, they're reaching out to see, are you a solid human being that I can trust? Are you a solid human being that I can be real with and open up about my life with? And that's where the entertainer performer thing has all sorts of problems, obviously.
Exactly.
Lots of things aren't entertaining, are they? Go on.
Well, and the other side of it is, again, astrology's 2,000 plus year tradition of people going to the astrologer because, as we were saying, they are the one who has the message from the stars. Many people in the general public think that, like, you know how it is at conferences, or even if somebody hears you're an astrologer, they're like, oh, what does this mean? As if there's only one level of meaning. That is a very classic general public perspective of astrology. And I think it behooves us to be able to say, look, this is my take. You could put 10 astrologers in the same room and they're all going to see something different. But for the purposes of our reading today, or how we're working today, this is what I see to bring up, or this is what I see, or based on the questions you're asking right?
Yes.
This is the
Yes.
layer that's coming up. So I think it behooves us to say that. And then also, again, back to the self-awareness. Now I can look at this list and say that my complexes would fall into feeling somebody's coming, so it would be sage counselor, and then also feeling like everybody wants to do this. You want to deliver what people want, which is the
Yes.
entertainer performer, right? So one of the best ways to start to disable or even deepen your awareness of that, right, is to simply say that there's limit. I'm a human, I'm limited, right? I don't want to draw that projection onto me. I don't want somebody to step in and expect me to be the entertainer, right? And they will, especially if that's my unresolved complex, right? So I want to head that off at the pass and say maybe right from the beginning of a reading, this isn't about me delivering material to you. This is about a dialogue. This is
I love
about
that.
us pulling something out of some understanding out of you with some information that I might give you, right? So that would be a way for myself that I might try to disable that unconscious need within me. What might you suggest?
I love what you just said. Well, I always start by just saying, how can I help today? And then I try to break down the expectations that are revealed by the answer to that question. So the question helps me, position the whole context of the reading as service, and therefore somewhat adaptable within my given skill set to the needs of what they're asking for. But it also allows me to listen to them to 10 or 15 minutes and understand their consciousness. I think the key fantasy that I have a problem with in all these concepts of astrology is the idea that the chart has this reality that it doesn't have. It is not philosophically real. It is not ontologically real. It does not have being like you have being. Patricia is real. Patricia's heart and mind and soul are real. Mark's are, and everyone else's are. Our charts aren't real in that sense. They are symbolic potentialities unfolding endlessly in myriad ways through time. So it's a symbol system. It's the gift of looking at a symbol system together. And then I try to ally as they offer what, how can I help today isn't just positioning me as the person that will help them. It positions the two of us together, the two detectives to solve the case, the two people cooperating in the adventure of life to find the best path through the labyrinth. And so that's what I love about it, that I love this sense of agency. And I think the danger of the mix of the psychic prophetess, entertainer, performer is those people that come and go, well, you're the astrologer, you tell me.
Exactly.
Kind of thing. And I think that's a dark path for the whole
profession. It's very tempting to like I said, if that's your kind of complex, it's very tempting to want to fulfill that projection, right?
But it's a dangerous path, isn't it, for everyone? The person that's asked it has unknowingly, profoundly given away their power.
Absolutely.
And the astrologer that picks up that dubious baton has started to add to that loss of power. The simple fact is, on some very profound level, the sacred mystery of life is unknowable by the human mind, is uninterpretable. There is no astrology reading that will just give you your life answers. It doesn't exist. And once you put that out of the window, once you truly consciously see the limit of astrology, that it's not just going to answer all your soul's needs and yearnings, and you can put that aside, you can suddenly get together in some kind of creativity and hopefully joy and look at what it could do for you.
The thing that I love also about the potentiality of a reading is two perfect circles meeting each other in the middle, like the Vesica Pisces. And the thing that exists within the middle is the chart. So there is a third thing within. This is, I'm just maybe putting into different terms what you were talking about.
Yes.
There is this third thing between us, which can provide objectivity when these roles are part of it or when these dynamics are part of it. Because I know for myself in a reading that, again, if I'm getting feelings about a person or it's triggering something in me, like, oh, they're such a narcissist. I'm not saying I would think that, but you know what I mean? Like they're, and then you look down at your chart and you're not really seeing that symbolism in there, then I would have to say I'm either feeling, and this is a little maybe more complex for this kind of conversation, but what I would recognize in that moment is I'm feeling something that's been projected onto that person quite frequently from early childhood, where maybe they've been told, you're too selfish, you're too this or that, and I'm starting to step into the role of that voice, right?
Because
I
if
would
you're
want to pull that back and recognize that I've stepped into that role and give that power back to the person by validating that this is something you've been told but may not be true, right?
But that's the power of recognizing the genuine empath within you. That's an empath capacity, that you're reading the initial layers of their energy field, and in fact you're explicitly in that sense reading their internalized superegoic messages and introjects. And of course, that's a very profound level to read, isn't it? Many people's lives are crippled by the inner judge, kind of crucifying their internal experience. And to get a read on that is potentially to ally with that person at a very powerful level to make some kind of step beyond the most punitive edge of those messages. So the stakes are high at this kind of level, Patricia. When you open up the chart, as you say, as that kind of middle ground, that slightly autonomous formative thing, you can show some people, can't you, the loaded fourth house. I remember showing this Christian lawyer that had no interest in astrology his whole loaded fourth house, the Pluto conjunct the South Node, the Jupiter square the nodes, and just saying, this is the house of mother, and him going, oh my God, he just knew, just how validating it was to him that he wasn't going mad, that this thing that symbolized something about his life potential showed where the key wound was. So that objective quality you're talking about, almost like the objective correlative, the idea that T.S. Eliot had for certain imagery and poetry that helped the whole thing cohere because you had this tangible sense of some real ground, that space in the middle that you're talking about. But you were discussing something there about your own capacity as a consciousness to read aspects of people's energy field. And I would argue that past a certain level of astrological development, if you really want to help people, that's the key territory to expand into. Not more astrological study, not more specialized insight into midpoints or Arabic parts or, tertiary progressions or whatever, but actually to just grow as a person, to grow as an energetic center, to grow as someone with essential individuality that can stand alongside another person with their emergent individuality and be open to it sufficiently to get some kind of read on it, to help them, to validate them, to help them position themselves, to help them get a sense of agency about where they're going.
And when I was talking about hollow bone, the way that I phrase it, and in fact, it's on one of my websites, the way that I phrase my role in a reading or a session of any kind with somebody is that I'm a midwife.
Yes.
So being a midwife then does, if you really can take that in, right? A midwife is holding a space for somebody to birth something out of themselves. So, and I'm the one going, that's it right there. That's where you need to push. That's where you need to breathe. That's where you need to be aware of. But it's not prescriptive. It's not, it's not fatalistic. It's basically pulling out of them, giving them promptings for their awareness, for them to birth that, then knowing and agency and response to that out of themselves.
It's incredibly profound, isn't it? As a man who has been exposed to real midwives just once in his life, over 24 hours, 4 different midwives on 4 different shifts over 24 hours of labor, the best of those moments, what they offer to those loving people in that kind of birth crisis around this most precious being in their life is just breathtaking. There are a couple of moments, the love I had for these people showing up and offering that solidity and that sense of I've been here before, and this will come to pass, is just breathtakingly profound. And really, you think about the loneliness in contemporary life, the mental health crises, the sense that people have of being pushed out to the margins. I mean, as astrologers, we have a potential sacred task, don't we? To just be there with people, exactly. Honor their process, honor their emergent self. It's a sacred challenge, isn't it? It's an incredibly amazing thing to be engaged in doing. And an amazing conversation with you. It's so nice to see you, and really what a profound engagement with a subject that I think we intended to speak on for 15 minutes.
Yes, I know. I know, and it's impossible because
it is impossible. Yeah,
it's impossible. But in closing, let's just share. I'd like you to share what your view that you might share with astrologers of healthy boundaries in sessions, or even holding energetic boundaries. What is that sacred space? What is a good boundary? What's a bad boundary?
Well, I mean, and it's a massive subject, so let me just try and give the very shorthand form. For me, don't discount conventional boundaries. They really are important to energetic principles. So it is important, whatever payment structure you have, that it applies, in every case, unless there was a pre-agreed exception, that you stick to time. If your sessions are 90 minutes and someone goes into some profound horror show in the last 10 minutes, okay, for human reasons, you might extend 2, 3, 5 minutes, not beyond for me. You close it down. It's their unconscious signal that they would bring up that profound thing right towards the end. They weren't ready for more of an engagement with it than that. Mm-hmm. So you stick to time, because professionalism and a sense of your own seriousness as a practitioner and how you've shown up and what you can offer, never mind studies on attention where people can't actually pay attention for much more than 90 minutes, in fact less, is just absolutely crucial. So the basic obvious stuff, and that's stuff that therapists are coached in and that astrologers very rarely are. I've heard astrologers go, oh yeah, amazing reading, it was only supposed to be an hour and a quarter and it was 3 hours long. And a little part of me winces inside, because I know that has tipped over into muddiness. It's tipped over beyond what could be truly
or the
held.
client, or the astrologers that constantly respond to clients' crises at all hours of the day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, because that blurs the line between that sacred mission we were just discussing, which relies on your professionalism and dedication, and just being some kind of loose friend or member of the same community. And you can be genuinely friendly with clients. I am genuinely friendly. Genuinely, there is a personal rapport, but it's not the same.
It's exactly not.
It has to be held entirely within the professional relationship. So I do think those kind of professional level boundaries are critical. And then the energetic boundary, I mean, honesty is key, right? It takes a lot of work and experience to really read where people are, right? Not everyone is going to be there. Not everyone has done the kind of insane amount of hours of work with people that you and I have done, right? People have to not pretend to themselves. We can just be honest. You don't have to be like some therapeutic master when you do an astrology reading. You just have to know when you're out of your depth and pull back from it, and not offer extras to extricate yourself from your own discomfort. So you have to kind of be centered and real and act with honesty, self-honesty about your limitation and the areas of work that you don't have the skill set for. And maybe you keep a list of practitioners,
referrals,
healers, therapists, psychics, whatever, regression therapists, whatever. You keep a rostrum of things that you can, go to things that aren't your skill set,
Absolutely. That's such a salient point. Well, I think we've gone well over the time that we wanted to. And as you said, we will have further conversations on this, because it's a very rich topic that I think we both bring 20 plus years of experience from different fields, but merge them together with astrology. So thanks, Mark. Thanks for having this conversation and educating.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
It's very nice
All right,
to see
everyone. Enjoy, and we'll see you again.